Ohio State recruiting camps are not all about the future. At least for me, I like to just get ready for the present. And that's what I do out at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And on a Thursday Thoughts edition of the Podcast Daily, I'm going to see how much Bill Landis has been paying attention to the current roster as well, because he's able to multitask a lot better than I am. So we're just going to compare some notes about what we've seen and heard about the current 2024 Buckeyes over the last 2 weeks so far in camp season.
I do find myself less capable of multitasking than I used to be, unfortunately. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just getting old or having a child that's fried my brain waves. I'm not entirely sure. So multitasking is more difficult than it used to be. But I've tried to do both. As you said, you're a little better. You're much better actually about kind of figuring out what's going on with the current team while we're out there. But I feel like I picked up a couple things. I guess I would start with I do feel like in the past at these camps we've seen like the current team do more workout wise, and I really feel like we haven't seen much of that, really any of it aside from like one instance that I want to talk about so far this month. And the one thing we did see was after one of the camps last week. I can't recall which day it was. Emeka Ibuka and Will Howard were doing some speed training, I guess. I think that's what I'm assuming that's what they were doing. And just kind of like running sprints in the indoor field on the Woody as like things are kind of clearing out. And obviously Emeka is a tremendous athlete. We knew that. But I was kind of taken aback a little bit by how well Will Howard moved. And like we know that obviously he ran the ball well and efficiently at Kansas State, but and I don't mean this to come off the wrong way, and I certainly understand what I look like as I say this, but like Will Howard, you see him doesn't maybe scream athlete at you the way he's built. He's got like a Peyton Manning-ish kind of build, maybe, right? Like he's 6'5" and 240 pounds. Like he's a big dude. But I thought he was running pretty well when we were watching him out there on the turf field a couple days ago. So that was just like a reminder to me of like we know that Ohio State's going to want to run the quarterbacks more this year, but Will Howard I think is probably like less of like a bulldozer than you might assume for a guy that's as big as he is, and actually pretty fast I think in the open field for a guy that's as big as he is too. So I just like remain curious of what exactly this running the quarterback more is going to look like, but it was nice to see Will just kind of running around to get a sense for the kind of athlete that he is.
I think it's because he dresses like Peyton Manning that you sort of discount the athleticism. Like
maybe.
Baggy
he's always
white
dressed for golf. Yeah.
He's either dressed for golf, which I can certainly respect, or he's got like the 1990s baggy t-shirt and basketball shorts on, which even still he had on the like workout gear over the top of that when he was running with the Mecca. So some of this is like it's a little tongue-in-cheek ribbing for Will Howard, and also like backing up what you're saying. Like if you just underestimate him by looking at him or the clothes he's wearing to a workout, you're going to miss some of the point there. And it is, I think, a little bit fascinating to put that together with the idea that going back to January when we talked to him on the podcast day, that's like, I'm a passer, I'm a quarterback. He doesn't want to be tagged with just the athleticism or dual threat or rushing ability, labels, which I certainly can appreciate and respect for him as well. But he does have that in his bag. And it's probably better than I think we've maybe given him credit for, because you alluded to it there, Bill, with like to just consider him a bulldozer, and for quarterback power, I think he's got the ability to do a lot more than that.
Yeah, and it's not, if you do watch him, if you go back and watch like what he did at Kansas State, like I might have said this before, but almost every run that I watched of him at Kansas State felt to me like the JT Barrett touchdown run against Minnesota in the snow in 2014, where it's like, how is he continuing to pull away from these people? Because like even the angles didn't quite make sense. Like someone's going to catch him, right? And a lot of Will's runs, like no one catches him. Like he's not like I don't know. I don't think he'd win like a 10-second split kind of thing, right? Like in a 40-yard dash, but I bet by the end of it, he's moving pretty good, and like moving as well, probably as most quarterbacks could anyway. So they're not going to. I don't think they're going to like use him as a battering ram this year, right? I don't. He's not going to run the ball a dozen times a game. I still think it'll probably be on average fewer than 5 times a game, and probably most games maybe only 2 or 3 times. But it is going to be something that I really do think unlocks something for this offense, whether it's increasing their third down efficiency or making them better in the red zone. I was going through a couple of those numbers earlier this week as I was writing something for Rivals, and this is off the top of my head, but I think that the red zone efficiency, like touchdown percentage, I think was the second lowest it's been under Ryan Day last year, and the third down percentage I think might have been the lowest it's been under Ryan Day since 2019 anyway, since he was a head coach. Which I guess is a smaller sample size, but anyway, like it wasn't up to snuff. Like it wasn't as good as it should be, and I think it's obvious to most people that when you have a quarterback who can use his legs, like those things just become a little bit easier. So it's not even like all that flashy, but I think even increasing the efficiency with which this offense operates even a little bit is going to open up so much more for what they can be.
I think that's why I'm leaning towards that the rushing total for Will Howard or Devin Brown will be higher than just 5. Between the 20s, it might be 0. There might not be any real benefit for that unless you're facing 3rd and 1 from the 21, and then you might do that. But I think red zone and 3rd and short, you will see a pretty substantial uptick in that from Ohio State. And I think that Ryan Day was trying to do that last year. I think back to the opener, like they dialed up. I don't remember if it was a pure quarterback draw or what kind of scheme it actually was for Kyle McCord, where like things opened up in the middle. He sort of made the wrong read and ran into the backside of a blocker. It didn't work. But like there was an emphasis on that from the start where it felt like Ohio State knew that they wanted to do that. That was an example for the guy who started all year. And then the other example is in the middle of the season when they decided to go the Devin Brown package in the red zone. Like I think what you're talking about, they've been pushing towards that. And they just couldn't get over the hump. An injury for Devin Brown and sort of like ineffectiveness there for Kyle McCord in those situations. Now you have a healthy Devin Brown and a Will Howard who's done both. It's like it's probably not going to be triple option central going out there, but in those short yardage situations, I think you'll probably see a way more of that.
I think you're right. I actually had forgotten about that rushing attempt against Indiana, although I did actually I watched it not that long ago because I came across a video on Twitter and like it was making fun of Kyle McCord, so like whatever. But I did find it kind of funny. It said like "Eff it, Kyle McCord's rushing highlights," and it like played like pump up music in the background, and then it was like a bunch of like 2-yard runs and scrambles. It's like okay, that's pretty funny. But I do think when next season ends and we put together or someone puts together the quarterback rushing highlights from the 2024 season, they will look substantially better because I think Tua and everyone in that room is more comfortable doing it. And probably Will Howard, given his experience, is probably the most comfortable of anyone.
Yeah, you're right. Well, that was a lot more quarterback run talk than I thought we were going to get into right off the bat. What else have you learned?
I think you and I read what you wrote at Rivals to prepare for this, and I think you and I are thinking similarly about G. Scott. And I just like he has a presence about him like this off season that I'm not entirely sure what it means, but it is noticeable. Like you can feel him trying to take a real leadership role on, and I think in these camp settings like that tends to bring out that side of him. Like he, as long as he's been around, like I think he's been a guy who has been like pretty generous with his time and someone who cares about like giving back. So it's not surprising to see him do it, but just kind of lands differently now when you see him do it. So I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how that translates to football, but I do feel like G has a different way about him this offseason, and I think you agree with me, right?
I do. Yeah, this is not the first summer camp that he's popped out there to work with kids. He's always done that. He has always looked for ways to give back money, time, resources, NIL, the whole deal. Like that's been a part of G. Scott for a very long time. None of that stuff is new. I think why this particular camp felt different to me and resonated was I'm over there watching. It was the first or second day. Maybe it was both. Maybe. I mean, he's been at every camp so far. And Keenan Bailey and Sean Banks just like stepped out of the drill. And G. Scott was leading it and going through every every step of the process for a particular route they were going to run, both the inside guy and the outside guy, hands-on instruction of that, descriptions, coaching as they went along. If somebody did it wrong, sending them back to the line to do it again. And he, for somebody who has had to go through the transition from wide receiver to tight end, and now to speak that language as fluently as he was doing on the practice field, to convey that to younger tight ends, that hit different for me, for sure. And again, it doesn't mean that he's going to execute it perfectly in August. I don't know that he will or he won't. I don't know that means he's definitely going to hold off Will Kazmarek for the starting job. We'll see when August rolls around. But for all the things that we've talked about, even a year ago, you'd say, well, the physical transformation's done. Like, he has added some weight to it. He's always been a willing blocker. Like, why is this not happening? I still, everyone's development plan is going to be different. And if he got maybe to, I'm 100% a tight end physically before he got there mentally, only G. Scott can say that. I'm saying what I've observed, and listening to him and watching him coach the position tells me that he knows what he needs to be doing to be a tight end. And the leadership part, somebody's going to have to fill that void for that room as well. And he's the one who's been here the longest. So I think all those signs are pointing in the right direction. And it's not a prediction for what it means, but it's an encouraging sign for what it means.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and I'm sure there are people listening who are saying like, "Oh, like, well, he better have it all down by his 5th year, right?" And like that's fair. But I felt like he's always been like not quite there, and he'd probably disagree with that. To your point, like I'm sure he would say that he felt like he probably more or less had it at least a year ago, if not prior to that. But it does feel to me that like maybe the transition is complete now. Like there's nothing else for him to learn or figure out or change about his game or change physically. Like I think he's sort of all the way there now. And now the question is like, what's the ceiling of G. Scott as a tight end, I guess? And that is unknown to me as well. But I guess what I've come around to is like when they went out and got Will Kazmarek from Ohio University, I was just like, okay, that guy's number 1 tight end. Cause I didn't believe necessarily that G. Scott was ever quite going to get to that level. Like, serviceable number 2 tight end, certainly going to play a decent amount, but not be the guy that's playing the majority of the tight end snaps. And now I'm not saying that I think it's flipped, but I am certainly more open to the idea of G. Scott maybe picking up that mantle and being that guy, because he just seems to have a seriousness about him that maybe has fluctuated at times. Combined with like all those physical attributes and the deeper understanding of the position that you're talking about, that I think could bring out the best version of him this year, whatever that is.
I think he also fits in this bucket, Bill, that feels like my number 1 takeaway. And it might be a completely a topic for a full podcast daily some other point. But like you look at G. Scott, you look at Tyleik Williams, you look at Donovan Jackson, you look at Jack Sawyer, you look at JT Tuimoloau, and on down the list of all of these 4th or 5th year Buckeyes on the field, they are 100% grown ass man. And talent is, you got to have it. You have to have talent if you're going to win a national championship. But I think there has maybe been some element for Ohio State that's been missing in terms of veteran experience. And that's not to say they've had none. They've had plenty of guys who've put off the NFL draft to come back. Last year, they had captains in Cade Stover and Tommy Eichenberg who had that in every way that you could want, physical, mental, the whole package. But I think you can go look at this roster at every single position, and you see 22, 23-year-old men who were also 4- and 5-star recruits who are coming back to compete against 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And we talk a lot about the on-field reps being important. Having that much physical time to develop and the way that these guys approach that, even just as Berm has said about Donovan Jackson, their faces are different. They are fully blossomed in past being a teenager. And I think that maybe we've not looked at that impact as closely as what you just notice when they're walking around even in shorts and t-shirts. It's like, oh God, imagine a true freshman somewhere else in the Big Ten having to deal with that. That sounds like a bad day for them.
Yeah, no, it does, and you are right. Like I think it's harder to get a gauge of in football sometimes. We have the benefit of at these settings, like getting pretty up close and personal with these guys when they're like sort of not in uniform, and like you get to see like, oh yeah, like that person who I would have called a kid 2 years ago, I would not call him a kid today, right? And I actually do think that makes a tremendous difference. And like up and down this roster, there are just a lot of guys who I think fit that mold, and that speaks to the maturity thing that we've talked about quite a bit, and maybe this idea of needing an older roster now to win in college football. And Ohio State certainly seems geared up to put that together and put that on the field this fall. But it has been noticeable. Like we were standing next to some DBs on Tuesday, and like I thought all those guys looked really good, and like the offensive linemen, even some of the younger ones, you can tell are like Carson Hinsman, who's only going into his junior year, right? I think looks vastly different than he looked a year ago. There's just a lot of that up and down the roster, which you would hope to be the case this time of year. A part of me wonders too, like I think that is a progression over the course of your college career, right? You take that more and more seriously as you get further in your career, which I think makes sense. But also like when you're right on the precipice of going to the NFL, or for a lot of this roster had a decision whether or not to actually go to the NFL, like you know what it takes, like sort of take care of yourself and like be in the right shape and sort of how to handle your business once you get to that level because you're so close to it. It just so happens that a lot of those guys who are of that mindset now are still on this roster, and I'm wondering how much of that may be like permeating down to the younger players as well. Because I think you see it most with that group of players at like 2021 class, but I would say that there are quite a handful of guys outside of that class who I think have seemed to take this offseason seriously as well. So maybe that's just an added benefit of Ohio State having so many guys back who could be in the pros right now.
Yeah, and again, it's not something that I'm not just saying it. Oh, these guys all work really hard. Like they deserve credit for that. They're definitely going to win because they've come back and look at all the physical development they made. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying part of the reason that Michigan had success in the last couple of years was they had fourth and fifth year players buy in, and that helped them beat some teams that maybe they should not have on paper because the veteran edge, it seems like it's more commonly accepted as true for college basketball. Like if you can gear up for a veteran team, and guess what, that would be better. Even if they're 5 stars, they might be 18-year-olds going against 22 and 23-year-olds. To your point, like this might be the way of it. You still have to have an incredibly talented team to win. I'm not trying to diminish what Michigan just accomplished a year ago. Those were good players too, but they were not recruiting at the level that Ohio State is. And part of the balancing act for a team like the Buckeyes and a program like the Buckeyes is like sometimes those guys can be NFL ready in 3 years. So when you get the benefit of a Donovan Jackson looking like he should be going to OTAs, or Tyleik Williams in the like unequivocally the best shape of his life, like I think that's gonna make a bigger difference where the margin of error might be built in to a higher degree for the Buckeyes than they've had before. Or if things go sideways, that they have been through some of those battles and have the scars built up to get through that. Again, like it is not, doesn't ensure them or promise them anything, but I think it puts them in a much better starting spot than maybe anybody else in the country. The debate is just always about Georgia and with top to bottom roster talent, but I feel like Ohio State, when you add in that sort of intangible, like that may elevate them.
Yeah, I think it will, especially in the new college football too, right? Where you can absorb a loss and like regather yourself and improve. Like I know we saw the 2014 team do that, and other teams have like lost games and then still gotten to the playoff, right? But it doesn't always happen. And I'm not necessarily sure that Ohio State is going to lose in the regular season, but like say for the sake of argument that they do, or counter whatever kind of adversity you want to conjure, I guess. Like I do think that this team is uniquely situated to kind of handle whatever comes their way, both like in just like in the maturity and like going through some stuff and the understanding of what it means to go through a college football season, but also to like in their kind of like versatility of skill set and what I think they might be able to do on either side of the ball to mask whatever issues might pop up during the season, or maybe have to like pivot to some different areas of strength than maybe what we're necessarily accustomed to for Ohio State. I just think like the roster does seem to have sort of everything it needs to kind of answer whatever challenge might be thrown its way.
Yeah. Plus, as we mentioned, all those guys like being around the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, which
For
means
sure.
that they've been pretty serious about their business. So we've really just scratched the surface about some of what we learned about this year's Ohio State roster. We'll get into more of that. And there's also more camps coming. So we'll try and pick up a few more notes and quotes and everything else in the days ahead before June wraps up. We're almost midway through already. How about that? That's exciting. There's football and there's ball to talk about. We're going to do that. On Friday, we're going to be back on the Podcast Daily, and it is going to be your questions. That's right. It is going to be a Freaky Friday notebook version of the podcast. So we'll get into more of that. Maybe it'll be about what we learned. Maybe it won't be. I don't know. We'll find out tomorrow, right back here on the podcast. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you then.